Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. A very warm welcome to all of you on today's webinar from Swift Kanban from Digite. The topic being how agile are we? Uh, I'm still seeing people join in, but we will go ahead and get started with some introductions and some housekeeping, and hopefully uh, get everybody a chance to join in, and especially onto their audio, and get started with the actual session for today. Um, Let me just take you through some of the agenda for the day, for the section. So we'll start with some introductions. I'll give you a quick introduction to Swift Kanban and Digite for those of you who may not know us. Uh, and then I will hand over the session to today's main speaker, Shuman Ip from Loyalty One. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session, hopefully about 10-15 minutes. And I hope that there will be enough for all of you in this to ask some questions of Shuman and learn about the session that he's going to present today. Um, just some housekeeping. We are recording the webinar, and we will share a copy of the recording after the webinar is made, so you don't really need to take any notes. Uh, if you have questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. We will take the questions using the Q&A box that you should see on the GoToWebinar panel on the right side. You can enter your questions anytime. We will take the questions at the end of the session after Shuman is done with his presentation. So hopefully we get to see some good questions that we can have him discuss and respond to at the end of the session. So with that, let me introduce Shuman. Shuman Ip is Associate Director, Agile and Lean Practices at Loyalty One. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I'm co-founder and Senior Vice President for Marketing at Digite. Shuman and I met recently. We met at the Enterprise Agility Conference in Spain, and we had a very, at least for me, it was very exciting because we got to talking, and I told Shuman that I'm from Digite Swift Kanban, and he turns around, he says, "Dude, I'll use your product, and I really like it." He was so animated; it made me really happy. So Shuman, thanks for that. Just to give you a little, all of you a little more background on Shuman, for those of you again who may not know him. First of all, Loyalty One is a pretty large company in Canada, runs the largest loyalty program, the Air Miles Rewards program. Uh, Shuman's responsibilities include essentially enabling flow throughout the organization, removing impediments, managing delivery risks, implementing feedback loops, and so forth, and ensuring that work policies are implemented. He's worked on different levels, from team all the way up to the enterprise level, and he's been at Loyalty One for 3 years across multiple functional departments, working as a service delivery manager. And outside of Loyalty One, Shuman is very active in the Lean Kanban community, and he hosts the Kanban Toronto and the System Thinking Toronto meetups in that region. Shuman, a very warm welcome to you. Before I hand over the mic to you, and if you have any more words to add about your work, please feel free to do so. But let me give a quick introduction to Digite, to those of you who may not know us. Um, we've been in this business of web-based collaborative products and solutions for distributed teams since 2002. We headquartered in Cupertino, California, and have offices in North America, UK, and in India. Nearly 1 million users of our products across the world, and our products cover the lean, agile sort of spectrum of project and portfolio management, application lifecycle management. And of course, Swift Kanban is our lean Kanban product that is fairly successful, especially in the European and American markets, where Kanban has, of course, caught on very well. Our major use case tends to be software and IT and DevOps type of customers, and we probably have about 80% of our customers in that space. But of course, we also have customers using us. So before I go to the other spaces, one of the key things that we do as part of this is we have a lot of capability in terms of portfolio Kanban and enterprise services planning, which is a specialized body of knowledge in Kanban. and we provide a lot of capabilities around managing risk, managing portfolios, and getting better at understanding your demand and capability that is placed on your teams and your organizations in order to be more predictable and to be able to give reliable commitments to your customers and so forth. So we have a lot of capability there for these organizations. Our software also gets used in a variety of different business functions, including agile marketing, HR, procurement, legal, etc., where Kanban has had a reasonable amount of success. We have a fair bit of personal Kanban users, and you can use it for a variety of things. We even have a Thanksgiving party planning template out of the box that you get in Swift Kanban. So if you haven't seen it, do check it out. One of the key things that we provide in Swift Kanban is a really wide range of analytics that help teams measure their performance, get a benchmark of where they stand and how they're improving over a period of time. One of the things that we have done in the last about 6 months or a little longer than that is introduce a bunch of AI-related capabilities, AI and machine learning capabilities. And one of the things that we do is provide sentiment analysis for teams that are working on agile initiatives or any kind of functions, and really help you get a sense of how happy the team is and how their state of the mind is helping them deal with work, and what are the different types of emotions that you see on the left hand side here that are being experienced as they work on different work items, and therefore help the team understand what are the most critical issues based on the team dynamics, based on the emotional status on those items. That's a recent introduction to the product portfolio that we have, and it's available with Swift Kanban as well. Just the last slide here on sort of the customers that we have. You'll see some, hopefully some known names, and some very large brands around the world use us. We have customers ranging from 100,000 plus users to very small companies, 50 to 100 users as well, using our products. So with that introduction, let me go ahead and hand over to Shuman. Shuman, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for doing this. And let me
thank you very much, Mahesh. Can you see my screen?
No, just
Is it all good now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much. There are actually some capability from Swift Kanban that I didn't know, so I'll need to talk to you afterwards. But today's conversation is not really about how we're using Swift Kanban, even though there are some of the slides that do have Swift Kanban in there, because in Loyalty One, we do use Swift Kanban, and it's actually a pretty good tool. So I would advocate for it as well. Today, we're going to talk about how agile are we? So when we ask this question, we are trying to elevate the conversation from team agility into more so the enterprise sense, the business sense. And that's why when you're in front of executives, when you're in front of your customers, how do you answer the question, how agile are we? So for the following hour or so, we're going to talk about this particular question, and then how we're going to equip ourselves with tools, with dashboard, so that we can answer this question in front of different audience. So today's agenda, very simple. We're going to talk a little bit about what business agility is, and then we're just going to measure it. And then after all these 3 metrics, then we're going to create a dashboard. And this dashboard should allow you to have a conversation with your executives, with your own team, with your own service, as well as with your customer, to see how agile you are and how well you can satisfy the customer's needs. So without further ado, let's get started. So business agility. When we talk about business agility, we want to kind of gauge the current situation right now. So I want you guys to think about your own situation. How important is agility to your own business or to your client's business right now? Give us some thoughts. Now, how agile is your company actually right now? If you guys are similar to the other audience that I have in live, then you would know that a lot of people want agility in their business. They feel like it's really important, but then currently they don't view themselves as really agile in the business. Let's look at some researches. So according to State of Agile 2019, it says that 97% of organization practice Agile development methods. But if you look at the lower area of the slide, it says only 6% report that Agile increases their adaptability to market conditions. This is from State of Agile 2019. Let's look at Deloitte and McKinsey as well. It says more than 90% of senior executives give high priority to becoming Agile, but only less than 10% of them see their firm as currently highly Agile. It seems like there's high expectation, but there's low reality. There's a huge gap between them. And it's not just from one source, it's from 3 different sources, as well as when I was asking you the situation, you can kind of see your own company or your client's company and see what the situation is like. If there's such a huge gap between wanting to be Agile and actually being Agile, then first we need to know how Agile we actually are so that we can use this as a reflective mechanism and then increase our capability or our agility. So what is business agility? Because at the beginning, we said that we want to elevate the conversation from team agility to more so like the enterprise or the business level. So in this sense, business agility is simply as shown on the screen, the ability of an organization to rapidly adapt to markets and environmental changes. Simple as that. There might be more components, more dimension to it, but then if we're trying to simplify it to the most easily digestible form, this would be it. So what? How do we actually measure business agility? How do we measure our adaptability to the market and the environmental changes? Well, before we go into this, we want to explore some of the common indicators of agility first. Some people might say,
Shuman, sorry
yes.
to interrupt you, but there is some audio issue at your end, so you're cutting out every now and then to very low volume. So if there is anything you can do to adjust your microphone or anything like that, please do. But we can hear you, but it becomes very soft all of a sudden.
Okay, let me go closer to the computer.
Okay, thank
you. If it's having problems again, yeah?
Sure.
Okay. So some people might feel like, you know, we have whiteboards everywhere, we have open office, everyone is co-located. We are really agile because of that. Huh. Some people might say that, you know, our team velocity is really high. It's improving every single time. Our throughput is awesome. And the team has retrospectives, and in their retrospective action items are all being addressed. We are really agile. Some other people might say, look at all our people. They're all certified Scrum developers. A lot of people have KMP. We have a bunch of Scrum Masters with CSM and CSP, all these certifications. Even our executives are having all these certifications. That's why we're so agile. And some people might say, we're practicing a lot of engineering practices to make ourselves really competitive in the market, such as TDD. We have a great CI/CD pipeline. Our code coverage is 100%. That's why we're really agile. But are those really the indicator of agility or indicator of business agility? And that's why before going into the 3 metrics, we want to talk about the criteria for the appropriate indicator for business agility. So in my opinion, there are 3 items. Number 1, we need to put a customer lens into it. What do we mean by that? Well, first off, in order to have a business, you need to have customers. Without customer, there'll be no business. That's why it's very simple. We need to put a customer lens into measuring our business agility. But what do we actually mean by customer lens? Well, in the simplest form, it means we have to measure something that's customer recognizable. When you're talking about a story that your team is working on, is that something your customer would understand when you talk about code coverage, when you talk about creating a database or linking in your APIs? Would the customer understand what that means? Would they care about what that means? That's why instead of measuring low level, still important, but tactical operational level stuff, we're trying to measure customer recognizable products or customer recognizable features, so that when we're measuring, we're no longer measuring the team level, we're measuring up a level to the business level. So that's number one. Number two, we're trying to measure the end-to-end service delivery. What do we mean by that? Well, when you are developing something, when you're trying to satisfy the customer, most of the time, it will go through a lot of different departments or people. For example, when you're in software development, you might first come across a customer's request, and a request will go into maybe call center or client services, and then client services will go to product, reflecting the need, and then product will go to development, development will go into testing, testing might go back to UX, and then for some UAT testing, and then UX might need to go to deployment for operation, for the operation team to do so, and then operation team might need to deploy it, and then the marketing team will need to take over, and then finally, after the whole campaign from the marketing team, then the customer will realize what they actually were asking for. There's a long pipeline just to satisfy that one customer request. But when we're measuring just siloed, when you're measuring only development, when you're measuring only marketing, only UX, only testing, without seeing the holistic view, this is depriving ourselves from enough data to measure how well we're satisfying our customers. Because a lot of times, if you guys are familiar with flow efficiency, or it's just common sense, is that once something is done, when you give it to another team, it doesn't necessarily mean that the team will pick it up right away. There might be some wait time in between. So even though the teams are all optimized, they're all locally busy all the time, the customers are waiting. And why are they waiting? Because the work is waiting in between the teams. That's why instead of measuring team level, per team level, we're trying to measure the end-to-end service delivery system. A good way to identify your end-to-end service delivery system is something called static. That's something we use in Loyalty One as well, called the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. And then from there, or you can use value stream mapping. There are different ways of doing so. But once you map out your end-to-end service delivery, then we can start managing so. Third is to treat each service separately. When there's a company, usually they're offering multiple services. When you're fixing production defect, that's one service. When you're introducing new capability or new features, that's another service. When you're adding on new enhancements to existing capability, that can also be another service. If you want to have something more relatable, think about Starbucks. They have a business for beverage, they have a business for food. Those are two different services already. And under beverages, there's also a service for cold drinks, hot drinks. And there's like latte, frappuccino, there's normal coffee, tea, if you want to go even more granular. Each service has different expectation and delivery capabilities. When you're just grabbing something from the fridge and pay for it, you expect to be able to enjoy it right away. You don't expect any delay whatsoever as a customer. But if you're going to Starbucks and asking for a frappuccino or a latte, then you do expect to have some delay because they have to make it. How long it makes, it depends how complicated the item you're asking for or the service that you're asking for. If it's a tea, well, maybe it's as simple as putting a tea bag in hot water and that's it. If it's a latte, then you have to put milk, put sugar, and you have to do the beautiful little latte art. So it might take longer. So each service has a different expectation from the customer, as well as the service provider itself has different capability to satisfy that particular service. So with these three criteria, we're now going to explore what kind of metrics we can use to measure how agile are we. Okay, so again, just to reiterate the three, there are three of the criteria. We're going to continue to talk about those throughout the entire conversation. But first, in order to measure how agile are we need to first identify which service we're inspecting. Are we inspecting our food service? Are we inspecting our latte service? Are we inspecting our tea services? Because once again, different services have different capabilities and expectations, so we need to treat them differently. After identifying which one we're measuring or inspecting, we need to know who is our customer. Most of the people would know who your customer is already, but then in case you really don't know who your customer is or you're not sure, here's a good limits test to see which one is your customer. When you're not delivering something, who's yelling the loudest and the fastest? Think about that for a bit. Well, maybe back to the end-to-end delivery pipeline. Maybe it's client services that's yelling at you. Maybe it's product management that's yelling at you. But are those really your customers, or are those merely a part of the end-to-end pipeline? So if we keep going onto the pipeline until the beginning of it, who's yelling the loudest and the fastest? Once we've identified the service that we're inspecting and the customer for the service, then we can finally measure. The reason why we need to know who the customer is because we need to know the customer's expectation so that we can see if our capability is meeting the customer's expectation. And so, in the following 3 matrices, we're going to talk about replenishment, release frequency, as well as lead time. And in each one of them, we're going to talk about customer expectation for each one, as well as your current system's capability for each one of them. So let's start with replenishment frequency. When we talk about replenishment, what do we mean by that? Well, in our definition, replenishment happens when the delivery system pulls in customer requests as commitments. And we bolded the word commitments is because it's really important to know it's not just anything that's in our backlog. It's not just anything that got asked by your customer. It's an agreement between the service provider and the customer as a commitment to do something. Let's give an example. This is my own fictional company called Moonbucks. And on the left side of the diagram, you can see that there's a cashier, there's a customer that's paying, and then there are 3 people that's lining up. Well, the 3 people that's lining up in the queue, maybe they already have their request in mind. They're already in the store, but we haven't taken their order yet. That's why their opinion, their requests are merely optional. We can choose to not deal with it, or we can choose to accept it later. But there's no commitment whatsoever for us to deal with them right now. That's why we want to treat them as optional. Then what is in a replenishment? Well, if you look a little bit up in the middle section of the left side, you can see that there's currently a transaction going on between the customer and the barista or cashier. This cash payment is a token that represents the commitment between the barista and the customer. Upon receiving the cash or the money, the barista or Moonbucks Coffee has committed to deliver whatever order that the customer is requesting. That to us is a replenishment. Anything that's in a queue that we haven't replenished yet, they're merely optional. So as you can see, replenishment might involve some kind of token. In this case, is cash. Later on, I'll provide some loyalty one example to further solidify this concept so that you will know in your own situation what actually constitutes a replenishment. So now that we have a definition of what replenishment is, so what? Why do we need to measure it? I thought we were talking about business agility. Well, replenishment shows how often we can adapt to changes introduced by our customers. Remember at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about business agility equals to how rapidly we can adapt to market and environmental changes. So replenishment actually goes hand in hand with it because it shows how often we can adapt to changes. The more frequent we're replenishing, the more we can adapt to changes. The less frequent it is, well, the less chances for us to adapt to market changes introduced by our customers. There's one catch though. There's a saying, Agile doesn't mean delivering faster, but it means adapting to changes quick enough. And we're emphasizing on the word quick enough because there's customer expectation and there's capability. Any kind of gap between the two might not be a good thing. You might be under-servicing your customer, or you might be over-servicing your customer. More on that later. But then, okay, so we're talking about replenishment frequency now. So how do we actually measure it? As you can see on the left side of the slide right now, there's a half circle dial type of thing. This is what we're using currently in Loyalty One. We have a dial that indicates hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And then first up, we asked our customer how often they expect us to react to their changes. That's why at the beginning, we need to identify who our customers are for this particular service that we're measuring. Maybe your customer is really logical and be like, yeah, monthly is good enough. But some of your customer will be like, yeah, I want it yesterday. They always want it yesterday. The next best thing, I want it today. So how do you actually get their customer expectation out of them? Well, first off, you can directly ask them. Secondly, you can see the inflow of requests, engage and see if that's the correct number. So you might need to have someone to marshal the options coming into your pipeline and filter out the things that are not going to be accepted by your service. But the inflow of information may or may not be skewed as well, because even though a lot of people come into your store, maybe not all the requests you will be fulfilling. So the third way of doing so is that you can just assume a number, assume a frequency, and deliver to that frequency, and see if your customer is happy or angry about it. If your customer is happy about something, they're not going to complain. And if there's no complaint, it seems that your assumption is right. Then you can continue to go on with it. But if your customer is angry about you not replenishing frequently enough, then it's an indicator saying that, okay, maybe you need to replenish more frequently. So there are a lot of different mechanisms of understanding where your customer is and what their expectations are. And we just indicated 3 out of a lot. So we can continue the conversation afterwards, but let's continue with that. The dial has a lot of different frequency. And then we're using a red dotted line to indicate where the customer expectation is right now. After that, we have a solid arrow or an indicator to showcase how often we are currently, as a system, taking in customer requests for this particular service. Now, this becomes a visualization tool. You can see how well our current capability is satisfying our customer's expectation. Once again, if there's a gap between the blue and the red, or the solid and the dotted, then you know that we're either under-servicing or over-servicing our customers. So how do we really construct this blue solid indicator? Well, that's when we look into metrics. Look at your historical data and see how often we're replenishing. It's not about how many items we replenish each time we're replenishing, but it's more so how often we're doing this replenishment frequency. Because when people come into Starbucks, maybe they're just ordering 1 cup of coffee, or maybe they're ordering for the entire company 80 cups of coffee. It doesn't matter how big the load is, it's about how frequent we're replenishing the order. So go back to your data, hopefully there are some. Jira is usually what people use. We're using Swift Kanban right now, and then there's a great indicator of where our commitment line is and then how we're passing commitment line. And then from there on, you can set a scope of 3 months, 6 months, even a year, it's up to you, and then calculate how many replenishment there are during this particular service, during this particular duration. So replenishment frequency signals the customer to prepare for their request in a ready-to-consume state. What do we mean by that? Well, in the start of a conversation, it means you need to pay. That means that your request is ready to be consumed by our service. How about in Loyalty One? In Loyalty One, we have process mapping. We have map out our value stream. And then this is currently our discovery Kanban. We go through requests, goal define, mapping and brainstorming, evaluate, and finally it will go into the column called up next. And then once it passes the up next column, that's our commitment line to tell our customer saying, hey, this is when we're committing to do your work. So in order to go through all these steps, these are real example from Digitay's Swift Kanban, by the way. While we're going through this discovery phase, we need to fill in all these details. So goal defined, we have a table for them to fill something out. Mapping and brainstorming, we have all these details they have to fill out. Evaluation, same thing. And then finally, once all these things are filled out, then we can move it to the up next column. And we can only commit to work on things when it's in the up next column, which means that if there are any information missing in any of these fields, we are not accepting the work. But at the same time, we're not just telling our customer to fill those in. We're working with our customer together, collaborating with them to fill these details in. So when we're setting our goals, we're setting it together. And then we're going to see if this particular initiative is fitting into our company's strategic objectives. When we're looking at workflow, we're going to look at our customer's current workflow and see how we can improve it to a better workflow. We're also looking at the business scope and see how well we can define it. Maybe we can slice it into further, so on and so forth. But basically, we're going on this journey along with our customer so that we're not just telling him to do something without any guidance or without any support. Here's just a more detailed view of what needs to be filled. And once all these items are filled, and once the ticket is in an up next column, it is kind of representative of, okay, this is ready for us to consume. Ready to be consumed state. Go back to the Moonbug example. It's essentially taking the cash from a customer. All these table, all the fields here that's being filled is essentially the cash that I'm taking from the customer. And once we take the cash, moving from up next to the next phase, that's when we're making a commitment to our customer saying, okay, now we're going to do your work. And that's what we mean by replenishment. It's not merely internally saying, okay, we're doing our customer's work. There's more than that. It's about what kind of things needs to be ready before it's ready to be consumed by us, working with the customer to identify those fields or those little details, and then make a commitment to it by moving from up next as a buffer into our system. So that's what we do. With an established replenishment cadence, customer knows when to get their feature request form ready. Because there are opportunity costs everywhere in a business. Let's say, looking at the dial, we're replenishing monthly. So our customer would know that, okay, every first of every month, we are going to replenish. So if it's just the second of the month, they might not have the urgency to fill in the form, or they might be using their time on some other projects, which is much more urgent than just filling out this particular form. But when it's the 20th or even the 25th of the month already, then they were starting to know, okay, the beginning of the next month is approaching, which means that replenishment frequency is going to happen, it's going to manifest. We better start working with Loyalty One to fill in the request form if it's not being filled already. Or if they really want to delay it, that's fine, because they already know when the next replenishment is going to be next month. So they just need to evaluate themselves whether they want to drop a lot of different things so they can get the request form filled for this month, or they could choose to wait and then get their work replenished the next phase. With this replenishment frequency, Now the customer has a choice. Instead of being blinded, they know when we can replenish their work. And we, as a service provider, also has more predictability on when we can replenish some work so that there's less overhead going on. Once again, we're trying to change the paradigm from order taker into a collaborative kind of paradigm so that we're collaborating with the customer, they're understanding when we can replenish, we're understanding more about our predictability, and we understand each other what's needed in order to replenish something. Second, release frequency. That's very, very, very similar to replenishments. But let's go into the definition for a bit first. What is a release? Well, when we're talking about release, we're saying that only when the customer has received the service as requested, that's a release. If you have done the work already and all the work is according to spec, it doesn't mean anything if the customer hasn't received it yet. The customer has to receive it in order for it to be a release. Let's look back at Moonbucks for an example. On the right side of the diagram, you can see there's a barista calling out medium Diablo coffee for David and 2 small Angio coffees for Anne. And then David is there already right beside the barista saying, yep, I'm David, thanks. He has received his Diablo coffee from the barista. That's a release from our definition because the customer has got their request fulfilled and it's actually in their hands. Whereas Anne, at the bottom right corner of the screen, she said that, oh, I am Anne, coming now. Even though the coffee is made already in front of the barista on the table, Anne hasn't received the coffee. The benefit of the service hasn't been manifested yet. That's why this is not a release. This is merely outputs being ready for the customer to consume, but the outcome of such product hasn't been realized. So hopefully this diagram can kind of draw the difference between a release outcome versus just a product being done, the output. So with this definition in mind, why are we measuring release frequency when we're talking about business agility? Once again, because it shows how often stakeholders need to do release-related tasks and go back to the customer, how often the customer needs to adapt to changes introduced by us. That's why it goes back to the point, well, isn't always releasing as frequently as possible, as quickly as possible the best? Not necessarily, because your customer might not be able to digest such a frequent amount of release. So we need to indicate what the expectation from the customer is, once again, in order to know if we're satisfying them, under-servicing them, or over-servicing them. Then how come stakeholders are here? Because sometimes releases is not only about your service. You might need to coordinate a lot of different people to satisfy a customer's request, or better yet, to release a customer's request. So that's why if you have a frequency going on, let's say it's at the end of every month, then your stakeholder would know, okay, Schumann or Schumann service is going to ask you to help by like the 20th or by the 30th of each month, and then we just have to help them out. It's more predictable for your stakeholder to do release-related tasks. For your customer as well, it's more easy to predict when they need to have resources to take in your work, so that we're collaborating with the customer to achieve outcomes instead of just pushing the output to our customers. So in order to measure it, very similar to release frequency, we need to find out what is the customer's expectation. How often do they expect to receive our service or our products? After that, look at our historical data and see how well we're currently releasing. Are we releasing every day, every month, every quarter, every year? Doesn't matter what the frequency is. But these data is going to visualize what the current situation. whether there's a gap between customer expectation and our current release frequency. Once again, these kind of visualization becomes a reflective mechanism for us to understand reality. And it's also becoming a stressor for us to address the problem. Because without unhiding the reality, we might not even know there is a problem. And that's why we need to understand this first. So as you can see on the slide, at the top right corner of the dashboard that we're slowly creating, we have the release frequency, and then the red dashed line as the customer expectation, and then the blue arrow, solid arrow as our current capability for release frequency. And then we can analyze and see if there's a gap. This is just the formula to calculate our average release rates. Once again, just like what Mahesh was saying, at the end of the conversation, at the end of the session, I'll upload the slides so that you guys can all get a copy of this. And then if you want to understand more about how to calculate it and whatnot, it's going to be here. So how does Loyalty One do releases? Well, first off, we use release frequency to signal our customer and collectors and stakeholders to prepare for release-related tasks. Let's look at an example. After up next, continuing on with our Kanban board, we go through design phase, build phase, and then finally release phase. Under release, there are several things we got to do as listed out in a policy, as you can see on the screen. We're going to extrapolate it to here. We have to deploy to production, of course. We have to communicate, train. We have to do some UAT. We have to add to starter kit something internal. So we have a map here saying that which kind of activity requires customers' help or needs customers' attention, which kind of work, which kind of policy needs our internal stakeholders' help. When we're deploying to production, we need to make sure to coordinate with operations so that they have bandwidth to release something or to push something out of production for us. When we're communicating, we need to make sure the customer is ready to consume our communication, as well as the internal stakeholders, such as our executives and whatnot, are understanding the new capability we're delivering. Training, definitely, because it's not only about us having resources, having time to train our customer, but our customer also need to make sure that they have people to get the training, to receive the training. And same as our internal stakeholder, of course, in case there's call center that needs to understand more about this functionality that we're pulling out, things like that. So basically, if we have a release frequency, it's so much easier to coordinate all these activity that's going on, both in the customer's perspective, as well as internal stakeholders' perspective. So that's what we're using release frequency for in Loyalty One. And then once you have these two dials, you can see this is the dashboard we're trying to create with 2 out of the 3 components that we talked about already. The release frequency on the right-hand side, the replenishment frequency on the top left side. One thing to note is that replenishment and releases, they all have transaction cost. The more you meet, the more you do training, or the more you're replenishing, it means that the more time your customer, yourself, and your stakeholder will need to spend on these transactional costs. The transactional costs are the things that were listed, such as communicating, such as filling in the request form, so on and so forth. So the more rapid it's happening, the more costs you need to incur. That's why, once again, it goes back to the saying, being more agile doesn't mean delivering faster. It means adapting to changes quick enough. We don't want to over-service, because when we were over-servicing, there are all these hidden transactional costs that may or may not be needed in our actual expectation from customers. So we just want to keep that in mind. Last but not least, the third point, lead time. What is lead time? Well, now that we have defined what replenishment and release is, it's pretty straightforward. Lead time is just an elapsed time between replenishment and release. How long is the customer waiting between our commitment to provide them with something and them actually receiving it? As you can see in Moonbucks, it's essentially between your pay and you receiving the coffee. Doesn't matter what's happening in between, whether you have a barista talking about coffee bean and then another barista adding the milk and sugar. Doesn't matter how many teams it gone through, how many processes it's going on, or the wait time between the two barista. The customer don't care. All they care about is whether their request is being fulfilled. The time between the request being made, committed, and the request being accepted. That's all. One of the three criteria, go back to it, the end-to-end delivery of it, instead of each team, each barista, how fast they're doing. Because the customer don't care about your internal operation. They care about when they're going to get their work or their request done. So lead time is not a number, it's a probabilistic distribution. Why are we talking about this? It's because it is not deterministic. When you go to Moonbuck, let's say 10 people order a latte. Some of them might receive it in a minute. Some people might receive it in 3 minutes. Some people might receive it right away in like 30 seconds. We can't really pinpoint exactly telling our customers saying, okay, you receive it in 1 minute, because there are variabilities happening in lives. And that's why we need to take those into account. So we're using our historical data to see what kind of delivery we can do for our customer. We use our historical data to generate a probabilistic distribution so that we can tell our customer two things. At the left, you can see a slider at the bottom, and in the right, also another slider. One is about how fast we can deliver, and another one is how predictable it is. And we're going to use these two values, these two numbers, to determine what lead time is. Before we do that, why are we talking about lead time when we're trying to evaluate our business agility? Tying back to the title of the conversation. Well, because customers care about when they're going to get their work. That's why when they ask, when am I going to get my coffee? When am I going to get my request? When am I going to get my feature? When is this bug going to be fixed? We have lead time measurement ready for them so that they can understand when it's going to be done. Better yet, for us internally, we know when something needs to be started. Because most of the time, we can't really control variability. Variability happens in life. So whenever something is done, we can't really control, but we can control when something needs to be started. And so with lead time, saying, let's say, historically speaking, we finished this thing between 5 days and 20 days. Then we can just start something 20 days ahead of the deadline so that we can guarantee that something can be done within the customer's expectation, even though there's a chance for it to be done in 5 days and wasting the 15 days. But then the satisfaction from customer is being there. So that's the conversation that we can have internally by using lead time, as well as externally by using lead time to answer the question, when will this request be done? So looking at this dial, you can see two things. The left side is how fast, and the right side is how predictable. Sorry, two sliders. So we need to understand how fast the customer expects our delivery to be for this particular service that we're measuring, and how predictable do our customer expect our delivery to be. So how do we read this expectation is that, as you can see on the left side, the dial now, the slider now is at 90 days for how fast and 75% at how predictable. So we read this as customer expects 90-day delivery 75% of the time. If there is one or two, let's say there are 10 orders that they have. If there is 2 orders that's over 90 days, it seems like they're okay with it because that's their expectation. As long as majority, namely 75% of them, is within 90 days delivery, then they're happy. So this is the customer's expectation that we've identified. And we can look at our historical data once again and see how well we're satisfying our customer. Now, how to read this slider is a little bit intricate, so let me explain a little bit, because we have two. So from here, we can see how fast we're delivering. We're indicating that we're delivering in 106 days. But then how predictable? It says our predictability is 57%. So how we read this is that we're delivering to the customer expectation of 90 days, 57% of the time. So we look at our historical data of our delivery and see how many percentage of it is delivered below 90 days and above 90 days. So anything below 90 days, that contribute to this 57%. And that's why we have that in our predictability as a solid blue. Remember, solid blue are the current capability that we have. Or we can flip the equation saying that, okay, let's see with the predictability of 75%, how fast we can deliver to it. So looking at these two sliders, we see that we can deliver to 106 days, 75% of the time, based on our historical data. So historically speaking, if we're drawing a line of 75% of our fastest delivery, all of them are being satisfied within 106 days. That's what this slider means. This is what this particular visualization is talking about. So once again, we're trying to talk about a probabilistic lead time here instead of a deterministic number. That's why there are two components here. In order to measure it, there are several ways again, but then what we're using is that we're using a spreadsheet provided by Troy McGinnis, and I provided a link right here. This is where we're using to capture all the data that we have. The start time, as in like the commitment time, all the way to the delivery time. And then from there on, you can choose to calculate your lead time, and then use the two Excel spreadsheet formula to calculate your desired percentile as well as your desired your current capability decentile or your current capability for your duration. And of course, this is just one of the ways. Another way that we're using is just using Swift Kanban, and then we have all the data there already. So whichever one you want to use, it doesn't really matter. But then once you have the lead time, then you can have a fruitful conversation with your customer so that they can understand when their work can be done. As well, you can have an understanding of when to start the work. So in Loyalty One, we're using lead time to communicate with our customer so that they can see if this is the service that they want. So it's similar to flight, for example. There's economy class, there is business class, and first class. If our current service, our current wait time is of satisfaction of yours, okay, then you can use this particular service. You will need to wait for 58 days, 82% of the time, according to the dial that we have on the bottom, according to the slider that we have at the bottom left corner. But if you're saying, no, this is something really urgent, we need to have more predictability and we need to complete this within 60 days, your current service is not acceptable. Then we can start having a conversation about class of service. Okay, it seems like quote unquote economy class is not good for you. Let's go into business class and see if that's okay with you. So we'll pull out our sliders for a business class or our higher class of service, give it to them and see if it's up to their standard, up to their expectation. So by having lead time, having all these data, we can not only having an understanding of our own system, but also having a collaborative dynamic with our customer, as well as our stakeholders. These are just a list of capability and predictability that we have for this particular service that we're offering. And then once you put all these two items, the two sliders into the dashboard, this is essentially our How Agile Are We dashboard, or the service delivery dashboard. We have replenishment frequency at the top left, release frequency at the top right, and then lead time in the middle to showcase how well we're adapting to customers' change, how well the customer and stakeholder need to adapt to our releases, and how fast we can deliver to their particular work item. Last but not least, where are we using this particular dashboard? Well, we use it in customer meeting, service delivery review, operation review, improvement initiatives, a lot of different places. We use it at customer meetings so that customer can understand where we are. We're gonna have a collaborative dynamic. Service delivery review is so that when we're under-servicing our customer or over-servicing our customer, we can readjust our service delivery capability by maybe limiting our WIB, by understanding the tail of our histogram, a lot of different mechanisms. You can understand more by taking maybe KMP 1, 2 course, ESP courses. There are different ways of doing so. But basically, we're elevating our game so that we can better satisfy our customers' expectation. We also use this dashboard in the operations review. Operations review is essentially getting a bunch of services together and see as a whole, business as a whole, how well we're operating. So we have a bunch of dashboards listing out and see how well we're satisfying our customer, so on and so forth. So last but not least, just want to call out, this is the origin of the dashboard. This is created by Alexei Seglov at KCP in the Kanban community. He created actually in LoyaltyOne internally as well. And then he was trying to measure the service delivery agility. And then for us, we want to take the component that's useful for ourselves, namely the replenishment, release frequency, as well as the dial in the middle for the 2 lead time. And we extrapolate those as our service delivery dashboard. Because we feel like, let's say, the graphs in the middle, top middle, the histogram, our customer might not understand what it is, or they might not even care how well we're delivering overall. They just care about their own component. So look at your own current situation and see which component is beneficial for you. I'm merely telling you what's useful for us in LoyaltyOne and a dashboard that we're using. And hopefully through this particular seminar or a particular webinar, you have a better understanding on how well you're delivering to your agility by creating your own dashboard as well. And with that, this is just to reiterate how it's being satisfied, how the 3 criteria is being met by the dashboard. And then I think let's go to question time. So let's see if there's any question or if there's any comments that we want to talk about.
Awesome. Thanks, Shuman. Great presentation and great revision for me based on my doing the workshop earlier with you at the Enterprise Agility Conference. So folks, please send in your questions using the Q&A box that you see on the right side of your screen. In the meantime, Shuman, I just wanted to lead off by a couple of questions of my own. One of the challenges that we've seen, and I've been in services organizations in my past career, one of the challenges that we see is that this definition of commitment or the realization of when commitment has happened can be a challenge. So when customers make a request, they sometimes believe that that is already a commitment by the vendor. And vendors sometimes have a hard time making that process clear to the customer that, hey, we have it in the backlog, but we haven't yet said yes, we will do it or when we will do it. Do you see that as a problem? Do you see that happening in many organizations?
All the time. In fact, one of the most common things that I've seen is an implicit commitment. Anything that's in your backlog is committed already, not by your service, not by your team, but by someone else upstream that you don't know about. So maybe it's the executive that's already committed to the customer that, okay, we're going to deliver this capability, and then you just push it to your backlog without even consulting whether it's something we can take on right away. So that's a really, really common phenomenon. And that's why we're trying to change the paradigm from order taker or like order being pushed to us into a more collaborative way. And in LoyaltyOne, how we change the paradigm is once again using static so that we're mapping out the entire end-to-end piece and see where the real commitment line is. Maybe it's actually from the executive, maybe it's from marketing. There are different ways. But then by mapping out the entire pipeline, that's how we're dealing with the situation so that we can have access to the customer, telling them, hey, this is where we are going to commit to you. Before that, even though you have a request in, we're still not going to take it in. We're going to evaluate it, but we're not going to commit to it until this point. And you are going to be in the conversation when we're at this commitment point as well, so that you are aware when the commitment is there, so that the commitment becomes clear and then the dynamic become collaborative. Did that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the key thing is the word collaborative. I think I've seen that it takes some time before the relationship between the customer and the vendor becomes mature enough that they can get truly collaborative. Till then, it is very easy for both sides to uh, sort of follow the order taker model. The customer expects the vendor to sort of jump every time they say so, and the vendor is under pressure to say yes more often than not, and
Yeah,
they're hesitate to say no when they should be. Um,
exactly.
so there's a question from Visma Badiani, and it is actually a question that I also had. In the slider that he showed, the red marks were for the customer expectation, and the blue solids were the actual performance. How do you measure the customer expectation? How do you capture the customer expectation, especially in cases where you might have multiple customers for the
Ah,
same service?
fantastic. That's a really, really good question. So first off, that's why at the beginning, we indicate which kind of service we're measuring, and then what is your customer for that service. So go back to the slide. You need to identify your customer. Maybe you're right. You have multiple customers. Then let's look at the most demanding one. Who wants the most out of your service, or who's yelling the fastest and the loudest, which is indicated at the bottom of the slide. So whoever's the most demanding, maybe you have some other customer that's less demanding, but then whoever's the most demanding, you have to satisfy them. And by satisfying the most demanding one, you will automatically satisfy the other remaining ones. So that's how I would first approach it, to identify your customer segments. Maybe it's one, maybe it's more than one. And then understand who's yelling the fastest and the loudest. And then that person, the most demanding group, will be the indicator of your expectation. And then once you have identified which customer you're trying to, or which segment you're trying to identify in terms of the expectation, then we can go into, asking them, or you can look at the inflow of work or how often we're releasing, or even just assume a number. Because as you said, most of the time customer, they might not even know what they even want. That's why we need to do kind of like a lean startup approach to just push it out, have an MVP, assume a number, test the market. And in this case, the market is our customer, and see if it's satisfactory. If not, then we'll need to move the expectation to a higher frequency, to a faster delivery, or to a more predictable delivery, and then continue to measure. So once again, this is not a deterministic way of, okay, once we ask the customer will definitely have an answer. This is a lot of conversation between yourself as well as your customer, and then finally achieve or reach a sweet spot between the two of you to understand what the customer expectation is. Something that you are okay with and the customer is okay with, something that's realistic. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I think it's a simple message, and I think it makes most sense that you how do you determine it? You simply ask, and I think as the more you listen to what your customers are saying, the more you learn about what their expectations are, and that helps you set the uh, sort of threshold for what the common expectation might be across customers, and then you deliver to that. Right? Absolutely, that
Exactly.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question is that I think it's a great sentence that you have used earlier as well. I've seen that lead time is not a number, but a probability distribution. That means that when you're trying to make a commitment on lead time, you've got to have the data, and you got to have the probabilistic curve of what are the different thresholds of lead time at different probabilities. I would assume that this would mean that you already have some way to capture the data for your past performance, and then being able to do this. Now, do you? I have seen Troy McGinnis's work, and of course you refer to that in this session as well. Do you recommend a particular way in which you capture the data from your Kanban boards, and then sort of using this model to generate the different metrics that you need?
Yeah, the simplest way, because in Kanban, there's a saying of start from what you're doing right now. So the simplest way is identify where your commitment line is. And then from there on, all you need to capture is just two pieces of data. when something goes through a commitment for each item, and then when it goes out of your system into the customer's hand. So with these two pieces of data, you already have the replenishment frequency, the release frequency, and the lead time. And then starting from there so that you can see where the gaps are. And you can use Jira, you can use Excel, you can use Swift Kanban, you can use a physical board for capturing these two data for every single work item that you have. So whatever you're using right now doesn't matter, but these two particular data would be something I recommend.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I think we have exceeded our time a little bit. So folks, if there are any other questions, I'd be very happy to answer them offline. And thank you all for staying back till the end of the webinar. Shuman, a great session. Thank you so much for doing this webinar. And I hope that we can work on some more in the future. Folks, for those of you who'd like to get in touch with us, let me just go ahead and bring up our contact details. Let me just share this slide here. And all right. There you go. So feel free to reach out to Shuman and ask any questions. Also, and I apologize, I think there is a mistake in the website, but you have the right email address and the Twitter handle for Shuman. If you have any questions around Swift Kanban capabilities or would like to see how some of these metrics that Shuman talked about today can be seen in Swift Kanban and our ESP module, which actually does a great job of the probabilistic lead time distribution data, we'll be happy to talk to you about that as well. So Shuman, once again, thanks very much. Any closing thoughts?
No, just reach out whenever you have questions because I love having a conversation. And thank you, Digite and Mahesh yourself for this webinar.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. And we hope to see you in one of our future webinars. Thanks again.
Thank you.